All right, Revelation chapter 10. We've been, for those who might not have been here the past few weeks, we've been going through the book of Revelation. It's been very fun. We've been taking our time. We've been learning a lot. And tonight we're continuing this study, taking our time through it. And I did want to let everyone know that for the next few weeks, we will not have Sunday night service. Next Sunday is July 3rd. We're not going to have Sunday night due to the holiday. The Sunday after that is July 10th, and that Sunday is it's the ordination service for the Michigan district, and Sean Barton is going to be receiving his district license there. So we as a church are tabling our Sunday night service so that we can go to the campground and support Sean. And then the Sunday after that will be the third Sunday in July, which is our potluck Sunday, so we won't have our study that Sunday either. So July 31st, I believe, is when we'll be back. So 4 weeks. So we're going to take some time off. So you really need to pay attention because it's going to be quite a while before we get back together. So you really got to pay attention because this chapter leaves us on a cliffhanger. You're going to want to know what comes next. So you're going to have to wait. So we'll have our study tonight and then we'll meet again in a month. Okay, Revelation 10, 1 through 11. Listen to these words. I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version, NRSV. And I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud with a rainbow over his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs like pillars of fire. He held a little scroll open in his hand. Setting his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, he gave a great shout like a roaring lion. And when he shouted, the seven thunders sounded. And when the seven thunders had sounded, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Seal up what the seven thunders have said, and do not write it down." Then the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, and the sea and what is in it. There will be no more delay, but in the days when the seventh angel is to blow his trumpet, the mystery of God will be fulfilled as he announced to his servants, the prophets. Then the voice that I heard from heaven spoke to me again, saying, "Go, take the scroll that is open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land." So I went to the angel and told him to give me the little scroll. And he said to me, "Take it and eat. It will be bitter to your stomach, but sweet as honey in your mouth." So I took the little scroll from the hand of the angel and ate it. It was sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. Then they said to me, "You must prophesy again about many peoples and nations and languages and kings." This is the written word of the Lord. Okay, well, after our first reading, what stands out? What is interesting about this chapter?
One thing is that he has one foot on the land and one in the sea, so it's more of an all.
The angel is standing on the land and the sea. Yeah, we'll look at that. That's interesting imagery there. Good, Solveig. We're going to address that tonight. Anything else that's interesting in our first reading? A rainbow over his head. Yeah. Why is that? We'll look at that as well. This is vivid imagery. Remember, what does John write in? What's the genre that we most liken it to? It's like a comic. It's like a cartoon. It's like he writes in picture words these grandiose, over-the-top images. It's almost hyperbole. The rainbow over his head, and there's his face was like the sun, his legs like pillars of fire. Interesting description, yeah. Eating a scroll. That sounds like a good snack, doesn't it? Why does he eat the scroll? That's a good question. Why does he eat the scroll? Yeah, what else? What else is interesting?
Shout like a lion.
Shout like a lion. Yeah. Or roar. Yeah, he gave a great shout and like a lion roaring.
He was told not to write.
Why was he told not to write down what the thunders said?
Well, I don't think because it wasn't time for it to be revealed.
Yeah, we'll look at why John was told not to prophesy, not to give that prophecy, not to write that down, but is told to prophesy about other things. Yeah, well, due to time's sake, we'll jump right into this. Remember, chapter and verse designations were not in the original text. We have added these on later. There weren't chapters and verses when this was originally written, so it's important to remember what we've discussed before. This is building on what we've been reading. Do you remember what we read about in chapter 9? It was a few weeks ago that we met, and do you remember what that chapter was about? The fifth and the sixth seals. You remember it was this. They were filled with calamity. The fifth and the sixth seals, these were now having ramifications on humanity. The first four seals we read about had cosmological implications. The fifth and the sixth had personal humanitarian implications. So when you go from reading about the first six seals, what do you expect to read about when you get to chapter 10? What do you naturally think you're going to hear? After the first six, what's next? You think you're going to read about the seventh seal, but what happens? Not yet. Chapter 10 is like chapter 7. Do you remember what happened in chapter 7 when we were reading? These aren't the seals. These are the trumpets. In chapter 7, we were reading about the seals and what happened in between the sixth and the seventh seal was broken. There was a pause. There was an interlude. There was a break. That was the time when when I played the video clip from the movie The Princess Bride, where the grandfather says to the son, "He doesn't get eaten." She doesn't get eaten though. There's a brief pause in the story in the midst of these seals breaking, these calamities. The author interrupts the story and says, "It's going to be okay." So we're having something similar here. The trumpets are being blown. I mistakenly said seals, but see, that's what happens in the book of Revelation. We're going to come to bowls in just a few chapters. There are going to be 7 bowls, and this pattern happens over and over and over again. So chapter 10 is like chapter 7. 7 was the break in the breaking of the seals. It was a pause. Now we have a pause in between the blowing of the trumpets. And do you know what happens when the 7th trumpet is blown? Do you know what we're going to hear about when the 7th trumpet is blown? What the scroll says, which is what? The contents of the revelation. So for 10 chapters now, we've been reading about all this, but we haven't heard the revelation yet. Once the 7th trumpet blows, that will be the contents of the revelation. So now we've got a brief interlude, and basically this chapter is it's kind of building suspense. John has been writing this revelation in this beautiful, suspenseful language, and when you expect to hear the climax, it's, well, hold on a second, not yet. There's a little bit more before we get to that. So it's building suspense, but there's also this great word that John will receive before the 7th trumpet is blown next chapter. And next chapter, just so you know, and we're going to begin to see the contents of the revelation. Here, we hear about how John is being prepared to speak that revelation. So, beginning in verse 1, I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud with a rainbow over his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs like pillars of fire. Does that sound familiar? Do these images sound familiar from earlier in the book? Where did these come from? The rainbow, the sun, the cloud. From the throne room. Earlier in the book of Revelation, these are the images that surround the throne. The throne is engulfed in this cloud and in a rainbow. And emanating from the throne is the sun, it's this light. And so this angel sounds like he's come from the throne of God. This is the imagery that's associated with the throne of God. Now it's being cast upon this messenger, this angel. He comes carrying a little scroll which contains a message from the throne of God. He held a little scroll open in his hand. What are the contents of the scroll? Well, that's debatable. Depends on who you're reading. It depends a lot on a particular scholar's theological tradition. There's a debate among scholars about what this scroll is. Now, we've been reading about the scroll that has the 7 seals on it, right? We've been reading about that for chapters now. We read about the breaking of the seals on that scroll. Is this the same scroll as that scroll? Why not? It says it's a little scroll. Now, this is the debate. The debate is whether that scroll and this scroll are the same or not. Right. You couldn't. The seals have been broken, but a regular scroll, that'd be a big meal, right? You eat a full scroll, and you're gonna be. You don't want to burp up that scroll. That's not gonna be. You eat too much of that, it's not gonna be good. And there are arguments to be made on either side whether or not that scroll is the same scroll or not. And I believe this little scroll is that scroll. Remember that in the book of Revelation, the imagery, it does not always have to be concrete. I believe that this is the same scroll because this scroll, we're told the contents of this scroll. If it's not the same scroll, then we don't hear the contents of both scrolls. The revelation will begin to be revealed, if that's not too redundant, in chapter 11. This scroll is described as little because John will be told to eat it. And we'll discuss why he's eating it in just a minute. But we're getting close to hearing the revelation of God. Once the 7th trumpet blows, we'll see the contents of the revelation. We'll hear the contents of the revelation. And it is this pastor's opinion, based on the research that I've done, that this contains the contents of the revelation, just like that other scroll contained the contents of the revelation. Remember that word we've been using time and time again, recapitulation? This is what's happening. This is similar imagery being used in different ways to produce a message that's similar. So, setting his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, he gave a great shout like a roaring lion. Okay, why does this angel have one foot on the sea and one foot on the land? What of the earth is excluded from this? What in the earth is excluded from this? The angel comes down from where? Comes from heaven with a foot on what and on what? On the earth, on the land, and on the sea. What in creation is excluded from the presence of this angel? But that's the heavens. There's nothing. There's nothing that is excluded from this. This angel, evidently coming from the throne of God, has a word for the cosmos, for creation. This is a good word for all of creation. And he is over all of creation. So he gave a great shout like a roaring lion, and when he shouted, the 7 thunders sounded. And when the 7 thunders had sounded, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up what the 7 thunders have said, and do not write it down. Okay, why the 7 thunders? Now, once again, what's this number? 7? How many times are we going to hear the number 7 in the book of Revelation, right? The thunder, 7 completion. And so this is the complete, what do thunders, what are they associated with? The voice of God, the presence of God. You remember this word theophany? Theophany, it's this epiphany from God. That's what thunders are in the book of Revelation and throughout prophetic literature. They're associated with theophanies. When thunders roar, God is speaking. This morning we read from Psalm 77, which talked about kind of all of creation like we've read, and the thunders and how God was over that. Here we have, in the thunder, we expect to hear the voice of God, the presence of God there. And when they had sounded, John was about to write, but heard a voice from heaven. Whose voice? It's not exactly clear. I mean, presumably this would be a voice from the throne room. This is where the angel has apparently come from based on the description of the angel, right? So the voice of the one seated on the throne, the voice of the Lamb. Presumably, I mean, it's a voice from heaven. This would be a voice, if it's not a voice from God itself, it's a voice from the throne room of God. And what does this voice say? Do not write it down. Why not? Why wouldn't John write what he heard in the sounding of the thunders? This is a theophany. This is the presence of God. Isn't that what John, this prophet, is supposed to be doing? Isn't he supposed to be recording a revelation? And there's a revelation in these thunders. But John is told not to write it down. That'd be a bit confusing. Isn't that what he's supposed to do? Why not? And I'm sorry, but I don't have all the answers. Not why, and there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of conjecture among scholars about why John wouldn't write this particular thing down. But perhaps what this indicates is that there are mysteries so great that we can't know them fully yet. Maybe that's what this means. There are revelations from God. There are things that God says and does in our world that we don't fully comprehend. There's a mystery here. God is greater than we. Perhaps that's why John was told not to write this down. Don't give everything away just yet. There are mysteries involved here. But we will have another revelation once the seventh trumpet is blown. Then the angel, whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land, raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, and the sea and what is in it. There will be no more delay, but in the days when the seventh angel is to blow his trumpet, the mystery of God will be fulfilled, as he announced to his servants, the prophets. Really quickly, if you can, turn back to Daniel chapter 12. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Daniel chapter 12. Old Testament prophet, great prophet. He's got a great name. You guys are too busy studying to catch my jokes. Thanks. What do you read in verse 7 of Daniel chapter 12? What is the imagery there? Look it over. This is basically the same imagery. The man clothed in linen who was upstream raised his right hand and his left hand towards heaven. And I heard him swear by the one who lives forever and ever, that it would be for a time, 2 times, and half a time. And then it continues. Does this sound familiar? What is this one that John is seeing doing? Raised his right hand and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created all things. There's a little bit of a difference though. In Daniel chapter 12, what is the time frame that is described? A time, 2 times, and half a time. What does that add up to? Yours has actual days. Your translation has 1,290 days. And it says a time, 2 times, and half a time. If you add that up, what do you get? 1 plus 2 plus 1/2. 3.5. If you have, do you remember what the imagery of 3.5 means? A brief period of time. It's a short period. It's not the fullness. So in Daniel, this messenger says there's going to be a bit of a delay before these things happen. What does this messenger say in Revelation chapter 10? If you flip back and then look at the end of verse 6, he says there will be no more delay. Daniel had this description of this one raising his hands towards heaven, swearing by the one who lives forever and ever, saying it's going to be a little bit longer. This one, who has a very similar activity, says there will be no more delay. It's right here. And what John does, and he does this time and time again, is John is employing familiar Jewish prophetic imagery and Jewish literature to indicate that the revelation is going to be given soon. If you are a Jewish Christian congregation living in Asia Minor in Turkey, and you hear about an angel who's standing with one foot on the land and one foot on the sea, raising his hand towards heaven, swearing by who back to Daniel chapter 12. That's in your social imagination. So you remember that imagery. Oh, we're about to receive a revelation from God. That's what's being described here. John is using familiar language. The one who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, and the sea is what is in it. Where did this angel come from? Heaven. It descended from heaven. Where is this angel standing? On the earth and on the sea. 3 categories. This angel is descending from heaven, standing on the earth, and standing on the sea. Then what is described? The one who lives forever and ever. Who created what? Heaven. Who created what else? The earth. And what else? The sea. These 3 categories. The angel who comes from heaven and stands on the earth and the sea, now we're told, is bringing a word from the one who created the heavens and the earth and the sea. This imagery is familiar. God made the heavens, the earth, and the sea. This angel descends from those. Perhaps what he brings is for all of these. Perhaps this messenger who comes from heaven and stands on all of creation has a word for heaven, earth, and sea, for all of the cosmos. The revelation is not going to be a limited thing. It's going to be a big revelation. It says there will be no more delay. Unlike Daniel, which had a time, 2 times and half a time, here there will be no more delay. But when the 7th angel blows his trumpet, the mystery of God will be fulfilled. Have we heard the mystery of God then yet? Evidently not. The mystery of God will be revealed when? The blowing of the 7th trumpet. Has the 7th trumpet been blown? No. And this is why I believe the little scroll is the big scroll. Because the mystery has not yet been revealed, but it will be next chapter. So a month from now, we'll read about that. There will be no more delay. Basically, the angel is saying, are you ready? Are you ready? You're about to receive it. The story is reaching its climax, and in the next chapter, we're going to begin to see the revelation. And then continuing on to verse 8, then the voice that I had heard from heaven spoke to me again, saying, go, take the scroll that is open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land. Who is this? A voice. Then the voice that I heard from heaven. Whose voice is this? The angel? The Lamb? God? Yes. If you look at verse 11, it's interesting. This is jumping ahead a little bit. What does verse 11 say? Who said something to John? They. Who's they? Heavenly voices. The Trinity, yeah. The voice that I had heard from heaven. Whose voice is this? We're not exactly sure, but throughout the book of Revelation, we've heard this voice come from heaven, command things to John. Presumably the voice of God, or the voice of the Lamb, or the voice of a messenger from the throne room. And maybe it's not exactly important whose voice it is, other than the fact that it comes from the presence of God. So I went to the angel and told him to give me the little scroll, and he said to me, take it and eat. Did you guys have scroll for lunch today? When was the last time you guys had a little scroll for dinner? What's going on here? Why was he told to eat the scroll? Don't you normally read scrolls? I mean, that's what you do with a scroll, isn't it? Why eat it? Becomes a part of you. Well, hold on to that thought. Once again, look back to your Old Testament. Ezekiel. There's an Old Testament reference. It is in Ezekiel chapter 2, beginning of verse 8. I'm going to read Ezekiel chapter 2, verse 8 to Ezekiel 3:3. But you, mortal, hear what I say to you. Do not be rebellious like that rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I give you. I looked, and a hand was stretched out to me, and a written scroll was in it. He spread it before me. It had writing on the front and on the back. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. It had writing on the front and on the back, and written on it were words of lamentation and mourning and woe. He said to me, O mortal, eat what is offered to you. Eat this scroll and go speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me the scroll to eat. He said to me, mortal, eat this scroll that I give you and fill your stomach with it. Then I ate it, and in my mouth it was as sweet as honey. Old Testament reference here. Once again, I can't tell you how many times have I told you this. John would be sued for plagiarism if he were to write this today. He's stealing imagery and language from Old Testament prophetic literature. The question is, why eat it? Well, I mean, yeah, we have this Old Testament reference. Well, because John is not merely a passive recipient. How often were prophets living testaments of the Word of God? They didn't just speak, they lived it. They lived an alternative way. When Israel was unfaithful, the prophets were faithful. They exemplified what faithfulness was to be like. They weren't passive recipients of this message to then speak it, but it became a part of them, as you said, Martin. Here, once again, the message of God becomes a part of John the prophet. So that which he speaks is not merely a message that he has. It is a word from God that has become a part of his whole being. And so he speaks that which he has received from God fully. He's eaten it. What happened when Ezekiel ate the scroll? How did it taste for Ezekiel? It was just sweet, right? How about for John? It tasted sweet as honey, but what happens when it hits his stomach? Sour or bitter. For Ezekiel, it was only sweet. It's different for John. It's bittersweet. Why? Why is this scroll bittersweet? It's the end of time. Well, what have we been reading about for the past few weeks? What have we been reading about in chapters 8 and 9? Have those been pleasant chapters? No. What did Ezekiel? For Ezekiel, it tasted like honey, but what was the content? What were in the contents of the scroll? Lamentations, mourning, woes. Right. So that was bitter for Ezekiel, but when he ate it, it tasted as sweet as honey. So it's similar here, only once it hits John's stomach, it will be sour or bitter. What we've been reading for a few chapters now, it has not been pleasant, has it? It's not something that you read and you're like, oh, that's cool, I want to be a part of that. Although, as we saw, we read about the grace of God in these chapters. That's what we've been reading about. But the Word of God is sweet. We might expect, after the chapters that we've been reading, that when he eats it, it's only going to be bitter, right? That's what you kind of expect after hearing these things. And in chapter 9, we read that there are these two woes. You'd expect it to be this, but it's not. It's sweet. That's what's shocking. What's shocking is not that it's bitter, because that's what we've been reading. What's shocking is that it's sweet. The Word of God is sweet. However sweet it is, though, how often were prophets received in the Old Testament? How often did Israel say, yes, we love you, Amos. Yeah, Jeremiah. How often were the prophets received well by Israel?
Not at all.
What did Jesus say? No prophet is accepted in his hometown, right? How often were the lives of the prophets sweet? Perhaps it's bitter or sour when it hits the stomach because the historical reality for prophets is they are not accepted. And very often they are, Jeremiah was publicly flogged, right? This is the life of a prophet. How often are the words of the prophet heeded by people? Not very often. Not very often. Unless you go to Nineveh, right? Unless you don't want to be a prophet and you go to Nineveh and you have a really bad attitude and then they accept it. But often the prophet was placed at odds with the populace because they so often spoke words of judgment. And God's words of judgment aren't only harsh, they're not only bad. What we're going to see is the judgment of God is very good and loving. But John will be revealing the judgment of God, and we've already been reading about it. We've been reading about the wrath of God, which is what? God letting people live into the reality that they choose. You choose unfaithfulness, there are implications for your life. And this might be a bitter pill to swallow. The word of God is sweet, it's good. The scroll is sweet, it's good. But it will not be received by everyone. And John might not have a great life because of his role as a prophet. Where is he, after all? He's in exile on Patmos because of his faithfulness. It's already bitter. So, continuing on, I took the little scroll from the hand of the angel and ate it. It was sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. He's just expressing the thing that he heard. He heard that it would taste sweet and that it would be sour or bitter. Now he eats it and it tastes good. Hits his stomach and ooh, that wasn't so good. You ever have those moments where you eat something bad and it hits your gut and you're like, oh no, maybe I shouldn't have eaten that. That's this little scroll. Then they said to me, who is they? The angel, perhaps the angel who's the messenger and the voice that has come from heaven that we've read about. You must prophesy again about many peoples and nations and languages and kings. What is this prophecy about? Peoples, nations, languages, and kings. Judgment, yeah, we're going to read some judgment, and that's going to be fun.
But there's also, because we already read it, encouragement, but probably John knows the people will not accept what he has to say.
There will be those who are not going to accept it, and we'll read that in the next chapter. In chapter 11, it's talked about that, when you get to the two witnesses especially. It can be difficult to follow the word of God. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so we're going to read the Revelation soon. Chapter 11. This whole chapter is basically a build-up. John is wonderful at building suspense. We read about, how long ago did John hear about the scroll? Did he weep because there was no one who was able to open the scroll? He was tormented that no one could read the contents of the scroll, which contained the revelation, because there were 7 seals on it. So we read about the first 6 seals, and then wait, hold on. 7 seals not broken yet. Pause, take a break. It's going to be okay. Break the 7. Okay, now we're going to read the scroll, right? Nope, not going to read the scroll yet, because we have to have the 7 trumpets. So you've got the first 6 trumpets, and man, those are accompanied by some calamities, right? Oh man, building the suspense, building the tension. And then you read about the first 6 trumpets, and then you get to chapter 10 and you expect, okay, 7 trumpets blowing, we're going to hear the revelation. What happens? Hold on. Not yet. Bit of a cliffhanger here. Chapter 11, we're going to begin to see the revelation in chapter 11, but there's going to be some stuff before that, before we get there. So this is building suspense, but it's important. It's not suspense for the sake of suspense. It's reiterating that this word comes from God. Where does the angel descend from? Heaven. Where specifically? The throne of God. Carrying within his hand what? The revelation. A scroll that is not just to be read, it's to be ingested. The word of God that is to be lived out and practiced. So this is what we're leading up to. And I hate that we have to wait so long to keep the study going because I love doing this. This is a really fun study. But on July 31st, when we get back together, we'll begin to see the contents of the scroll because, do you know what's going to happen? The trumpet. We're going to hear the trumpet will blow, and so we'll begin to see that. Any final thoughts before we end for the night?
I would think, John, we were really excited when you said you were prophesied the kings and all the others. That's why you found the Isle of Patmos in the first place.
John was on the island of Patmos because of peoples and nations and kings, and so he's going to prophesy to whom? About whom? Many peoples, nations, and languages and kings.
He was already suffering because of that, and God said, guess what?
Right. And remember, do you remember what empire has been present throughout this book so far already? The Roman Empire has been very, very present in the language and in the imagery, and we're going to see that a lot of the peoples and nations and languages and kings are going to fall under this similar language of the Roman Empire. Because the Roman Empire had what? Many peoples, many nations, many languages, many kings. So yes, that will play in again. Yeah. Any other final thoughts before we close in prayer?
Other than it wasn't woven, God, but God planted that encouraged me to say, well, if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to have to get off the island.
Sure.
So it was bittersweet
Right. Right.
for him to say, well, I'm going to get in the same trouble, but at least I'm going to get off this island.
Right.
They can't prophesy to him if I'm on the island.
We'll see that. We'll get into that in the next few chapters. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
We're not going to meet the 3rd, the 10th, the 17th, and the 24th?
Oh, maybe we'll get together on the 24th. Maybe I calculated it incorrectly. Yeah, we should. Yeah, we should meet on the 24th. I was incorrect. Thank you, Solveig. The third Sunday is the 17th, not the 24th. I don't know how I misspoke about that, but I did.